Hello, welcome to a new video. This is project 2, building a water feature. So you can see this wall, it's something we inherited when we bought the house 14 years ago, and it separates the patio and the garden, and it has this funny sticking out bit. I don't know why it's there, but it has always been there, and I had this idea about 2 years ago to turn it into a water feature. Admittedly, I'm bringing you in on this project a bit late. I'd already emptied the soil and stones and cemented the sides. As you can see, it wasn't a very neat job. So that was my first step, was to make up some cement mixture and fill in all these gaps. My first piece of advice to anybody working with cement is to wear a mask. Cement is really fine and it gave me a really bad cough for about 4 weeks. Secondly, the mixtures I'm using of cement, sand and water are completely done by judgment, and I think that was a downfall on my part. I probably should have researched properly what mixture to use when. So a bit later I do some bricklaying and I probably should have used a different mixture for that. So it's worth researching what to use when. It leads to inconsistencies if you don't, and sometimes cement does bind, sometimes it doesn't. And if you want to do a proper job, I guess you should take that extra step. So I mostly use my hands to fill in, for example, in between the bricks, but I also use a trowel at times. I also use my hand to smooth out some of the walls. Basically made it look a bit more tidy and neat. Now I had a vision of what I wanted to do, and I did some drawings beforehand. So this involved making a cement mold, and you can see me doing this here. Hours on making measurements, so 5 seconds did not do it justice. Cut it all out using a jigsaw. I then put it all together using some nails and a hammer. A very basic joinery method, but it did the trick. In my blueprints of making this mold, you can see a bit later on, one of the roofs of the box, instead of putting it on top of the 4 sides, I put it in between. I don't know if you can tell or understand what I mean, but that made taking the mold out later on quite difficult. So my advice would be, think about disassembly and think about how easy or how hard it's going to be to take the pieces away once you take it out of the mold. This mold is actually made out of MDF, and it's just some scrap wood. More often than not, if you walk into a timber merchant and just say, do you have any scrap pieces of wood, they'll give you something to use, and that's a good way to cut your costs down on these sorts of projects. Before I put the cement into the mold, I line it with some cooking oil, and then I put the cement in. Again, this cement mixture is completely done by eye. I filled it halfway, and then I got this mesh piece of wire, actually something I used for my first project, and I put it in for some reinforcement. Looking back, I don't think that this cement platform would hold up without it, so I think it's really important. Then it was time to disassemble it, and actually the pieces came away really nicely. You see here, and even from the base, the cooking oil seemed to do the trick. The middle section, the indent, was a bit tricky, as I mentioned earlier, but a bit of advice from my dad, a lot of hammering and drilling, I eventually ripped it out, and it left me with this really nice platform, and it's just what I had in mind. I opted for a mains powered pump rather than a solar panelled one, and this is something I bought off Amazon. There'll be a link. This then attached to some tubing that I bought from B&Q, which was sold per meter, and then these finally attached to some water feature nozzles, which give the water feature its charm. These were all attached using Jubilee clips, which ensured a watertight system. This is where some bricks I got off Facebook Marketplace for free came into action. The pump kind of sat in between these 2 broken ones, and the rest of the bricks kind of piled on top. I picked these ones in particular because I knew the hole in the middle would be perfect to allow the pipe to go through. And then the platform just sat on top. I then did some bricklaying, the first time I'd ever done any bricklaying, and there was a lot of measuring and leveling using the spirit level, and it took me some time. I think the first time I did it, the mix of cement wasn't quite right and the bricks weren't binding. So going back to what I said at the beginning, use the right mixture. I think you're meant to use mortar if possible. Anyway, I leveled it all off and neatened up the sides a bit with a bit more cement. Finally, the platform went on top. You will have noticed from the beginning the wall was very weathered and there was a lot of cement on the sides and it was looking quite old. So a jet wash, I love jet washing. It completely restores old brickwork and patios, and it makes it look completely like new. It's so satisfying to do as well. So I gave it a good jet wash, and there was some cement still stuck on the brick, so I chiseled that off, and the wall really was looking like new. I then went to B&Q and color matched some paint, and this was special masonry paint, and it kind of added to the waterproofing properties. Cement on its own is not completely waterproof. Although it holds water, I believe it would erode quite easily over time. So this paint, which is made specifically for outdoor brickwork and cement, it gave the structure an extra layer of waterproofing and protection. The final few steps involved putting everything together. The pump sat quite nicely on its ledge, and the nozzle fitted quite nicely as well. I cemented in the nozzle to make sure it didn't move, and the attachments that it came with can just fit on top. I also added some polar white stones just to add to the aesthetics. I then filled it with water. It was quite cloudy, so I drained it and filled it again until it was clear. So yeah, it was working, and I thought it didn't look half bad. But just like every project, it wasn't quite finished or quite perfect. I would have liked to have some better cable management for that pump cable, and I still needed to put an outdoor outlet to plug in the pump. But I'd get an electrician to do this. Here is a breakdown of my costs, a total spend of £60, which is not bad. This was definitely a more challenging project, but it was certainly worth it. Thank you for watching.